chance that I get, I'll make the most of it. Love becomes regret. Let's take our time to say what we felt. Here's what we got before it's all gone. We might promise tomorrow, so I'm gonna love you like I'm gonna lose you. I'm gonna hold you like I'm saying goodbye. Wherever we're standing, I won't take you for granted, 'cause we'll never know when we'll run out of time. So wherever we're standing, I won't take you for granted, 'cause we'll never know when we'll run out of time.
Hot up here. Woo! Oh yeah, thank you. So you're gonna ask that next. Yes, or the lights, right? No, I'm nervous. Lights actually. Yeah, agree. Are there any more things you want to? So we're covering units, police spray, full broadband, statewide broadband, like two broadband options. Right, so it's like a right of way or a broadband. And then got like the tax breaks, aid program, then I have what is this? Yes. And I'm gonna ask about online Substack, what's got the rest of the information. Yes, I haven't counted, but it's more than
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome GMA First Vice President, Linda Blessinger.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. My notes say to tell everybody to take their seat, but I think most of you have already done that. So, as chair of GMA's Legislative Policy Council, I have the privilege of overseeing much of the crafting of GMA's legislative platform. As such, I can relate to you that it is imperative that we as local government officials pay close attention to the lieutenant governor's race and each candidate's position on issues that are critical to our local governments. Not in a partisan way, which you'll hear me say a lot. I don't believe in that. Not in a partisan way, but in a way that seeks clarity from the candidates on where they stand on issues that are important to city leaders. As we move closer and closer to this important election, we want to hear from the candidates, have them hear from us, and hopefully forge a relationship of trust that will last long into their administration. Building those relationships, as we know, are incredibly important. The problems facing our state are challenging, but certainly not insurmountable if we work together. That is the message I try to convey every time I have an opportunity to do so. We want state leaders to be our partners. I hope you have had the opportunity to visit the GMA website lately. GMA has launched, it's an awesome website. If you haven't been there, if you don't know about it, it is a website called 2018 Connection. So you go to the GMA website and you go to the 2018 Connection, which is tracking all of the candidates for lieutenant governor. We follow what they say, what they have said in response to issues of importance to city leaders, what they are saying on the campaign trail, and what experts are saying about the issues we are concerned with. If you haven't had a chance to look at the 2018 Connection website, I really do encourage you to do that. It's really great, easy to get to, easy to navigate, and it's a wonderful tool. Today, we have the unique opportunity to host one of the first forums of the candidates for one of our state's highest offices. We decided to host these forums now because the primary takes place in May, not long after the General Assembly finishes. These debates give us the opportunity to hear from a group of Republican men and a Democratic woman seeking the office of Lieutenant Governor. So let's get underway. We will begin with the Democratic candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Sarah Riggs Amico, and then the Republican candidates in alphabetical order. So I'll now turn the forum over to GMA staffer Aileen Harris, who will act as the moderator for our forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good afternoon, and as the mayor said, each candidate will be called alphabetically, beginning with the Democratic candidate, followed by the Republican candidates. Each candidate has 8 minutes to give an opening statement, followed by a question from each of our esteemed panelists, reporter Jill Nolan with CNHI, and Maya Prabhu with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Candidate has 2 minutes to answer the question. Then after the question and answer period, they have 2 minutes to give a closing statement. When the candidate has 30 seconds remaining, I'll hold this panel up. So let's begin. We'll start with our first candidate, Sarah Riggs Amico.
Thank you, Eileen. And thank you to everybody who's here. Thank you very much to the Georgia Municipal Association for having this forum today and for the opportunity to address all of you. As the political newcomer here, I don't take this for granted, and I'm very grateful to be a part of this process. So since I have the unique distinction today among your speakers of being the only one who's never previously held elected office, I thought I might use my time in part for you to get to know a little bit about me and about why your organization means so much to me personally. So I grew up in Southwest Missouri in a small town. I went to public schools. I'm the proud granddaughter of a public school teacher. I'm a proud public school parent here now in Cobb County. And that education gave me the springboard to pretty much every opportunity I've had in my life. I ultimately went on to attend Washington and Lee University for undergraduate and made my way to the Harvard Business School where I completed my master's in business administration in 2003. So for the last 15 years, I've really been in the business world. Every job I've ever had has really shared a couple of characteristics. Number one, saving and creating thousands of jobs. Number two, I've worked a lot in the capital markets, including with early stage investors and trying to get small communities of businesses launched. And number three, I've worked a lot with entrepreneurs and starting businesses. And in the course of that time, what I've found is that the political world has increasingly begun to impede on the business world. In the boardroom now, we're addressing issues like healthcare. We're addressing issues like continuing education. We're addressing capital markets, interest rates, bond markets. And as those things have progressed, I've found myself increasingly having to deal with the political in the business world. So for me, my story is sort of interesting in how I got to a boardroom in the first place. In 2008, my family acquired a small, struggling car hauler. So for those of you who have never seen them before or didn't know what they were called, car hauls are the double-decker trucks you see driving down the highway carrying vehicles. In 2008, at the height of the financial collapse, we bought a company that had about 120 employees, so relatively small in the grand scheme of things. About a year later, we had the opportunity to acquire a competitor who was 10 times our size called Jack Cooper. It was a family-run business that was founded in 1928, and the family who owned it really wanted another family to purchase the business so that they could continue to take care of their people in the way that the Cooper family had for 3 generations. We were very fortunate to be able to purchase Jack Cooper in the spring of 2009. And within a matter of weeks, if not months, both the General Motors and Chrysler bankruptcies occurred. So we found ourselves really as a part of the comeback of the American auto industry, fighting for every job, dealing with issues of pensions, dealing with the Great Recession. And as a part of that, we learned the true resilience of the American worker. I learned a lot about the dignity of those workers. In fact, for those of you who've seen our campaign launch video, there's a gentleman named Cliff who's the driver in the video. He's actually been a driver for 33 years in our industry. He'll retire this year with 34 years. These are good people, they're hardworking, and they're counting on people like me to make sure that they can have full pension, health, welfare, good quality of living, and a high wage. So that's where I've spent the majority of my time. So that initial 120 employee business is now the largest finished vehicle logistics carrier in North America. I manage a fleet of over 3,000 tractor trailer combinations. We have about 50 terminals in the North American market and probably about 90 locations if you combine all of our ancillary businesses. We've grown since 2008 from 120 to over 3,000 employees, and we've done that in the absence of private equity. So it's really been a bootstrapped Cinderella story. And what that's taught me is that we're not just in cities. We're in markets that probably look a lot like all of the places where you live and work. We're in places like Arlington, Texas, Fairfax, Kansas. We're in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And we've learned a lot about how to create jobs in those markets as well. So one of the things that concerns me and that brought me into the political world is the uneven nature of economic development in Georgia. And I'd like to talk for a few minutes about what I think is driving that, not as somebody that comes from the political world, but as somebody who's been a job creator for the last 15 years. We've got to take a real look at healthcare and education and whether or not the parties in our government can work together to accomplish the results our voters demand. On the healthcare side, I'm concerned. You've all seen the statistics. When you have 60 counties without a pediatrician and more than half of the counties without an OBGYN, when you have rural hospitals closing at an alarming rate, it's not just a moral question. This is a question for economic development. Because those of us who run businesses, those of us who choose where to put the next location for our company know that we can't plant a location where our employees can't take their kids to the doctor. We can't plant a location where our employees can't go to have a baby. These are going to be long-term impediments to economic development, and it's something that I'm absolutely committed to changing as your next Lieutenant Governor. In addition, I think we have to look at education. As I started to say, this is a passion project for me. My kids are in public schools. I am proud to be a public school graduate, a public school parent. But we've got to recognize what investing in education means. You can't possibly continue to underfund education and expect to produce the world's most competitive workforce 10, 20 years down the line. You can't possibly continue to cut education and expect that the next unicorn company comes out of Georgia. We've got engineering talent coming out of here that will create the jobs and companies and industries that will control our future, whether that's artificial intelligence, fintech, cyber tech, healthcare technology. We've got to keep those students, we've got to keep those graduates, we've got to keep that talent here in Georgia, and we've got to get them creating businesses throughout our state. But to do that, we're going to need a 21st century infrastructure that enables them to plant jobs and businesses in places that aren't just Atlanta. We're going to need local capital to fund that early stage startup culture. We're also going to need, again, a solid education system that continues to invest in the next generation of workers and access to healthcare so that those of us who spend our lives creating jobs will have healthy and educated workers to fill them. Last but not least, I want to talk a little bit about why your organization matters to me personally. I grew up as I said, in a rural southwestern Missouri community. I know what it looks like when the last specialist in a practice at a hospital leaves your town. And I know what that looks like when one of your family members now has to drive an hour down the road to get to the next specialist, or 2 hours to the next hospital who can do that. I understand what that means for the families who aren't just a number or a statistic. These are real families that are now having to travel an hour each way to go to a pediatrician, couple of hours to get to a nearby hospital or to have a baby. And I just don't think that's something we can accept. My grandfather was a city manager in a little town in St. Louis, Missouri called Des Peres. And I understand that local control and local solutions, more importantly, for these issues are going to be key. So I'm hoping we're going to get a
Thank
chance
you.
today to talk about how we build those solutions together.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Ms. Rick. Enrico. Ms. Nolan, you have the first question.
Hi.
Hi, Jill.
The only form of government which is currently growing in recent years is cityhood, and many elected officials from those new cities are here with us this afternoon. What is your opinion on the creation of new cities?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends on the area, right? I think our communities need to make a lot of these decisions at the local levels. One of the beautiful things about the American system of government is that we've developed this philosophy of laboratories of democracies, whether that's the state within the federal system or certainly local and municipal communities within the state. So in my view, if there are local municipalities who choose to form new cities and can do that in a way that's economically advantageous to their citizens, that's sort of what the American democracy is all about. I've been a big believer in our system of government. I'm a student of that almost lifelong. I believe in American exceptionalism and that this is part of the magic that makes it happen. We don't have government that just happens from the top down. We have these ideas that bubble up from the grassroots, and candidly, sometimes those are better than what we could get from the top down.
Thank you. We'll reset the time. Mr. Prabhu, you have the next question.
There's been a lot of talk about the need to improve infrastructure in rural areas, including high-speed broadband. Where do you stand on allowing private for-profit telecom companies to have access to public rights of way to expand access to broadband?
Yeah, this is something I think, so as a political newcomer, this is something I'm still learning a lot about. And I think it's really important that we engage those local communities as well as the property owners in those discussions. But for me, this is the perfect example of how we need to do a better job of bringing businesses into solving some of the problems that plague our state or some of our communities, particularly in rural Georgia. We've got a great set. In fact, I think we've got 450 of the Fortune 500 companies who have offices in Georgia, and I think it's 17 of them that are headquartered in the Atlanta area. We've got businesses starting throughout this state. For me, part of what I see missing in the government landscape right now is the appropriate engagement of those businesses in creating solutions to these problems. And again, not just from one side, not just from the corporate side and their needs to get things like infrastructure out into on the broadband front. I think you also need to bring in companies to look at economic revitalization. We need to look at educational systems. We need to look at smart partnerships to expand access to healthcare. So from my perspective, this is a great place to bring together all of the stakeholders and make a decision that works best for Georgians. It's interesting because in the corporate world, this is just sort of how things work, guys. It seems to be somewhat different in politics, but for us, when we approach a massive decision, we're engaging labor, we're engaging investors, we're engaging employees, we're engaging our customers. There's not a single stakeholder that doesn't have a seat at the table in those decisions. And while everyone may not walk away from the table with exactly what they wanted, we all walk away with a solution that's infinitely better because we all participated than it would have been if any one entity or stakeholder had made that decision solo. So from my perspective, these are community discussions, they're stakeholder discussions, they should be robust, they should be public, but they should be participative with the business community as well.
Thank you. We'll reset the time. You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing statement.
Great. Well, thanks so much. It's funny, 2 questions. I'm grateful to have the opportunity, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface, guys. There is so much that we can do here. And what I'd like to offer to everyone in the room today, and I mean it very sincerely, throughout the last 15 years, I've had what I call an open door policy for my team members, for my employees. Anytime they want to come by my office and sit on my couch or have an impromptu conversation, they're always welcome. And anybody I've ever worked with would tell you the same thing. So what I'd like to extend to you today is an offer to do exactly that. I understand that for many people to see a pro-choice, pro-business, pro-labor Democrat, evangelical at that, is a little bit like watching a unicorn walk across the stage. But I want to encourage you to think of me as somebody that will work with anyone who's willing to roll up their sleeves and solve a problem. Because again, I don't come from the partisan world. I don't come from politics. I come from a job where every day I am expected to show up and sit down even with people who vehemently disagree with me. And we are expected that even if we disagree 99% of the time, we find the 1% overlap where problem solving gets done and where our stakeholders' needs come first. And that is exactly how government should function. We're here because we've been given a job or we're trying to get a job to be in service to the people of Georgia. That is the highest honor and the absolute magic of our system of government. It is not a responsibility I take lightly, any more so than I take lightly going into a boardroom and delivering on my fiduciary responsibility to a business. I want to invite you to take me up on this. Come, ask me questions, set calls, have meetings. I'll come to you. Engage me in conversation. Challenge me with your hardest questions. Tell me what you need to be successful and how we can accomplish that together. And I
Thank
will
you.
listen. Thank you very much for
Thank you
having
for
me.
your remarks. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Our next candidate is Jeff Duncan.
Thank you so much for that opportunity. Great to meet you, Sarah. So I walked in the back door, I had a flashback. In 1994, I got to play in the College World Series with Georgia Tech on the baseball team. And in 1995, shortly after that, we came back into this ballroom and threw a party like you've never seen before with family and supporters. And they handed us our College World Series ring. I probably would have never guessed that night when they handed me my College World Series ring, I'd be sitting here talking to you about running for lieutenant governor. Probably other folks on my team that would be even more surprised. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor to run for lieutenant governor. It's an honor for my wife and my kids as we travel the state. It truly, truly is for us. I want to start by telling you a little bit about my background because I think it's really what separates me from the other folks in our race here in this Republican primary. My first paycheck came on a baseball field. Great place to get your first paycheck. I got drafted my junior year out of Georgia Tech and got to spend 6 great years playing in the minor leagues for the Florida Marlins organization and learned a lot in those 6 seasons, right? I learned how to work hard, but probably most importantly, I learned how to chase a dream. And chasing a dream isn't about waking up in the morning and it happening. Chasing a dream is about chipping away at it every single day you show up to work. And that would later serve me well in the business world. It now serves me really well in this journey that my family is on. Knowing that baseball was going to end at some point, I started to write a business plan and had it ready to roll. So 2 weeks after my career ended untimely with a shoulder surgery, I started my first company. And we started big, right? It was in our living room. It was, we called it, my wife and I called it our global headquarters. But we grew and we got to experience the American dream. But for us, probably most importantly, was we got to watch other families experience the American dream. We got to watch families come to work with us and send their kids to college and get ready for retirement and start their careers out of college. It was a great opportunity for us to see others experience the American dream. We sold that business a number of years later, and really it launched us into a number of different opportunities in the business world. Most folks at this point say, well, where in the world did politics come in? Politics came to my wife and I in a little bit of an unusual spot. We were sitting at church, and our pastor had a series that was called Recovery Road, and it simply challenged us to stop complaining and start getting involved. Right? Many of you are in this position here because you had the same interest. You wanted to get involved and you wanted to make a difference. You know, I didn't get into politics to meet new friends. I didn't get into politics to pad my resume. Pretty happy with the one I've got. I got into politics because I wanted to make a difference. And so I jumped into an election against the State House, essentially a longtime incumbent. I won the race and walked into the General Assembly in 2013 and didn't know a single person in the room. But what I did know is what my principles were. And I knew what my values were. And I knew that I wasn't just wasn't satisfied with the title. I wanted to make a difference. And so I went to work. I went to work with a number of folks in this room that helped me pass 3 very important bills that are now on the books here in the state of Georgia. One is the Cargo Theft Act. Georgia was third in the nation in cargo theft when I got sworn in. We passed a piece of legislation that's allowed us in 1 year to drop cargo theft 68% in the state of Georgia. We then wrote Michael's Law with the help of many in this room. Michael's Law allows you and us as a state to start to crack down on folks that want to serve underage kids alcohol, and we raised the age of bouncers to the age of 21. And last but not least, we passed the rural health care bill. Together, we created a $200 million tax credit program that allows you and your communities to decide how to fix your rural hospitals that are struggling to just keep their doors open with not a single string attached from downtown Atlanta. Look, I'm running for lieutenant governor, like I said, not to make friends, not to pad my resume, but because I want to make a difference. I think I can do it better. I think I can do it bolder. And I think I can create a culture that rewards good policy over good politics. Way too many of the problems in your community are dying a painful death at the Georgia Capitol, not because it's a bad idea, but because petty politics are being played in the back rooms, in committee rooms, and on the House and Senate floors. Your problems deserve to be taken head on. Look, this race is a sharp contrast, and I'm not going to sit here and deny it. I'm not supposed to win this race. I'm not the next guy in line. I started this process at ground zero, but we have continued to walk across the state and tell our message to folks. I've not been in elected office like my opponents for decades, and I'm proud of it. I've not voted exactly the way I'm supposed to. I'm proud of that. I don't have a long political resume. I don't. Folks don't care about long political resumes anymore. They care about real resumes. They care about people they can look in the eyes and that they honestly believe that they know what it takes to create jobs, what it takes to fix the problems we have out there. Look, the problems that you face in your communities are huge. And you're tired of people talking about ways to just talk about ways to improve education. You're ready to see action. You're tired of folks talking about modernizing the tax code here in the state of Georgia to help your communities. You're ready for action. And you're tired of people talking about access to broadband, just talking about it. You're ready to see action. Look, I'll leave you with this and would love to field some questions. I don't have to be the next lieutenant governor. It's not on my bucket list. I'm probably not supposed to be the next lieutenant governor. But I tell every room in Georgia that I get to speak to every single day, I let them know that I want to be the next lieutenant governor. I want to help shape the future of this state. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Provo, we'll start with you this time. Your first question.
Do you support more transparency from the Department of Revenue, such as sharing a list of active vendors with local governments or providing more data about local sales taxes to cities?
One, it was great to meet you today for the first time, and congratulations on the new role, and welcome to Georgia. Look, I've never thought that transparency is a bad word. I think we all understand what transparency looks like, and the voters really, truly want transparency. I think for me, we need to drive as many decisions as we possibly can down to the local level. The part of this whole equation when I got elected and walked into the state house of folks in cubes in Atlanta are smarter than folks who sit in city halls and county commission offices are not as well versed to solve the problems, I think is wrong. I think the ultimate decision maker is those folks that are in the communities, and I get to watch that play out every which way throughout my time in the General Assembly. I support transparency. I support the opportunities for communities to be able to elect those folks and to be able to tackle those issues.
Thank you. Ms. Nolan, we'll go to you now.
The House Rural Development Council has proposed putting state money toward building out the broadband infrastructure in rural Georgia through reverse auctions and funding it through a telecom tax that would replace franchise fees. What is your position on using taxpayer money to incentivize wireless providers to expand in rural broadband?
So it's a problem, right? Broadband. How many folks in here think broadband is an issue in your community? It's a challenge, and we need solutions. I'm one of those that think that the local communities are going to bring the best solutions forward to us. I think technology is going to be a large part of what we do going forward. I think that there's an opportunity to modernize what we do, and I don't think we need one fix for every single community. I don't think we need to rush in and say, well, this works for this community or for these three communities and us tell you what to do. I think we ought to open up the spectrum. I think free markets works in a lot of places. I think in some communities, free markets are ignoring you, because there's never a business equation to deliver those broadband services out to the most remote places. But if we're going to truly be the state we want to be, if we're truly going to accomplish what you think and what I think is the best days in front of us as a state, right? Not many states can say that. But our best days are in front of us. If we're going to truly accomplish those goals, we need new ideas to solve old problems. You know, one of the challenges I saw at the General Assembly was we continue to recycle session after session after session, the same old ideas. It's like folks in elected office are scared to death of innovation. But the best way that you have seen in your communities for your businesses to grow are through innovation and strategy. You know, I have a program that I've launched in the last few weeks that I'm talking about in every community I go to in Georgia called BIG, Built in Georgia. I want to be the production capital of the entire Southeast. And I think we do that by bringing opportunities for business to come here and to call this home and allow rural communities to be engaged. I just saw the mayor of West Point had an opportunity a few weeks ago to go down there. Kia is a prime example of what that's done in that community. It has created an entire generation worth of jobs. So you're going to hear me come through your communities and talk about BIG, Built in Georgia.
Thank you. We'll reset the clock, and you have 2 minutes to give us your closing statement.
Thank you for this opportunity. I want to use this time here to talk about a very important initiative to me. And I've used it as a guiding light over the last few years at the General Assembly. And it's called the 4 C's: churches, charities, corporations, and citizens. I'm one of those, along with many in this room, that believe the 4 C's should be the front lines of defense against poverty. The 4 C's, right? Because churches and charities and corporations and citizens show up to work every day to help the issues around poverty in your communities and in my communities with innovation, with volunteerism, and probably most importantly with exit strategy. So as Lieutenant Governor, I want to work with each one of your communities to look for opportunities to leverage the talents and resources of the 4 C's to try to use Georgia as an example for the entire country as to how we take on these challenges. It's a bipartisan solution. We're not talking about Democrats or Republicans. We're talking about those people in need and opportunities to reach in to creative ideas to help them. I mentioned earlier that this race is about a sharp contrast, and it is. And we've got 4 months till the primary to be able to put our best case out there. And so I look at everybody that I see, and I try to just let them understand that if I win this race, if I'm the next lieutenant governor, if I'm the next Republican primary winner for this race, it's because folks all over this state look me in the eye, and they believe I'm an honest person that's going to approach the job with the utmost integrity. I'm going to listen to everybody in the room. I'm never going to think that I'm the smartest person in the room. I'm going to absolutely ask a ton of questions. And I hope this is a better place when I leave after 4 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. We appreciate your comments. Our next candidate is Rick Jeffries.
Thanks for everybody showing up today and giving us this opportunity to be here. I see a lot of friendly faces out here since I worked for 53 cities around the state. But I wanted to start off and do something a little different, because some people in this room will remember Mayor Richard Craig. He was the mayor of McDonald for about 8 years, and he passed away last week. As a matter of fact, they're laying him to rest as we speak. He was great for Henry County when Henry County was growing from a county of 20,000 people to a county that's got 240,000 people now. He was on the school board. He served 16 years on the city council. If y'all don't mind, I'd like to take just a few seconds for a moment of silence. Amen. Thank you. All right, a little bit about myself. Born and raised in Henry County. We had a cotton farm up until about 1980, and we sold that, and Henry County started to grow. And for those of y'all who don't know where Henry County is, it used to be on I-75 where the traffic stopped when you was heading to Atlanta, but now we got those reversible lanes. But we stopped farming cotton, and everybody started building houses. I got in the water and wastewater business in 1982, and I worked for Henry County, and I've been a water and sewer director ever since. I started my own business in 1999, and like I mentioned, we work for 53 cities, and I see several of them out there. But y'all, as I'm running around the state, and I'm asking everybody these questions, what do y'all think the #1 problem is in this state? And nobody's mentioned it yet. It's workforce. Every industry, every city, y'all out there know, how hard is it to find a water and sewer operator that's certified? It's hard, it's big. But what the problem is, my son-in-law works for a big contractor, and he said the #1 place they find jobs is to go to another job site and pay them more money. And I raised 4 daughters, and this much I know. When they was in the 9th grade, I knew whether they were going to college or not. My oldest daughter, I knew she was going to college. Second daughter, I knew she wasn't. Third daughter's going to college. What we've got to do is the career academies that we've started, we've got to get those in every community. And we've got to go back to our high schools and teach these people trades. We are missing the boat here. Half the kids aren't going to college. So we got to get them trained. We got to get them ready to go to work. And that is the number one problem I've heard. I got elected to the Senate 7 years ago. And one thing I should have mentioned I was a city manager in Locust Grove for 7 years, so I'm one of y'all. And I did go to the dark side and was a county commissioner for a little while, but I came back. But in the Senate, one thing I noticed was rules and regulations. I mean, how many laws we have to pass? Every year there's 400 or 500 new bills dropped. And y'all remember, some of y'all that were city managers, y'all probably remember the solid waste bill plan you had to fill out every year. I was the one that got rid of that. We had to do that special audit for the 911, got rid of that. Too many rules and regulations. But on the workforce, that is the number one problem. And we have got to do something to get these high school kids ready to go to work. Being in the water and sewer business, I'm an infrastructure guy. I know we need rural broadband. That's once you go past I-20 and get, even Henry County, even though we're part of Metro Atlanta now, we got broadband problems. So we got to work on that. And going back to college, the kids that do go to college, and remember, all of them don't get hope. Does anybody want to guess what the cost of tuition has done in the last 6 years? How much y'all think it's gone up in 6 years? 31%. Families can't afford that. So one of the things I want to do as lieutenant governor is I want to sit down with the board of regents. When your kid goes to college as a freshman, we need to lock in the cost of tuition. That way you can budget for it. You know what it's going to be for the next 4 years. And that's got to happen. Families can't afford this. And then, and I'm sorry y'all for being like this, but I've met some of y'all earlier. I've been a little sick under the weather. So, but with that, I'm just going to go ahead and close and let y'all ask some questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Nolan, you have the first question. Let's give a minute for the time to reset. Okay.
Speaking of workforce development, an idea that's been put forward would offer tax breaks to people who relocate to rural communities that have declining or stagnant populations. The perk would be increased if local governments join in. Do you think incentivizing rural living in this way is a good strategy to help these struggling communities?
Absolutely. We've got to do something. It was mentioned earlier about the hospitals and rural hospital and the broadband. We need to do something. I'm going to give you an example. I was the one that passed the legislation last year that let these brew pubs and these craft beer people be able to sell on site. In Richland, Georgia, little town down below Columbus, they got Richland rum, if you've ever heard of it. Once that bill was passed, this man went in and started buying other buildings. He bought the old motel. He's fixing it up. It's that one little thing that can help y'all as a community thrive and change. But I do believe we need to do something to help.
Thank you. Ms. Probert, you have the next question.
Georgia's Constitution has a chapter on home rule for municipalities, yet legislation is regularly introduced to keep cities from acting locally, whether that's regulating plastic bags or the placement of Confederate monuments. What is your view on this type of legislation?
I'm torn on several things. Not me being a city guy, I like local control. But, you know, when we have state laws and people try to do something locally that's against the law, you know, like the Confederate monuments, you know, there's state law in place. And it's just, you know, so that should provide over, you know, like the sanctuary cities. So that's against the law because you had state and federal laws. So I'm not for local control when it comes to that. But as far as passing stuff down that should be there, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You now have 2 minutes to give us your closing statement.
Again, thanks for having us here today. And you can go to my website. It's www.rickjeffries.com. And we're averaging about 1,200 miles a week. And so if I haven't been to your city yet, I will be coming. And I'll have my cards and some brochures over there. Feel free to call me anytime. Being in the water and sewer business like I am, I'm on call 24/7, 7 days a week. So feel free to give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next candidate is Senator David Schaefer.
Thank you so very much. It's a tremendous privilege to be with you today. This Sunday, I see many good friends and people who've been encouraging and supportive of my candidacy for Lieutenant Governor, and it's an honor to be with you and spend a few minutes talking about some of the issues that you're concerned about and that we're all concerned about at every level of state government. I want to start by talking a little bit about myself. My grandma Schaefer, if she were alive today, would be 105 years old. She was born in 1912, passed away 10 years ago. She lived 95 years. She was the mother of 7 children, including my dad, who was her 3rd child. And in the early 1950s, she lost her husband, the man who was my granddad Schaefer, in a workplace accident that left her the single mother of 7 small children. Now, this was a full 15 years before the Great Society, so she got a widow's benefit from Social Security, but that was basically it. She went to work to support her family. She cleaned motel rooms at a nearby motor lodge, and she was a lunch lady at the local elementary school, and her children worked. My dad and his brothers each worked part-time jobs. I don't know where it is today, but I remember when I was a child and we would visit my grandma Schaefer's house, my dad would point to this giant glass jar in the kitchen. And he would tell me that at the end of each week, he and his brothers would deposit that jar, and from that jar, the common expenses of the family were paid. That affected me too. When I was 13 years old, I went to work. My dad got me a job as a janitor at a local church. I did not have to put the money in a glass jar to pay the common expenses of the family. I got to keep my $10 a week, but it was critically important to my dad because of the way he had been raised, that his son understand 2 things: that all work is good, and that there's no type of work, not cleaning toilets or scrubbing floors, that is beneath anyone. I agree with Ronald Reagan. The very best social program is a job, and my public service has been animated by trying to create an environment here in Georgia where business flourishes, where jobs are created, and where the people are ready to work. And I've done that in cooperation with you. When I was elected to the state Senate in 2002, the Senate district I ran in that included parts of Gwinnett and Forsyth and Fulton County included 15 cities, almost 100 elected officials who I worked with when I was first elected. And in the time that I've been in the state Senate, I've been involved in the creation of additional cities. I was involved with the formation of Sandy Springs, and later of Johns Creek, and of Milton, and then of Peachtree Corners in DeKalb County. I co-sponsored the legislation that created the city of Dunwoody. My public service really has been guided by 2 principles. One is that decisions ought to be made at the closest level to the people who are impacted, and that the local governments that we set up need to have every tool available to them to secure the prosperity and the safety of their citizens. And that's why I've 3 times been named a champion of Georgia cities and have nearly 200 mayors and city council members who've endorsed me for lieutenant governor, because I see the relationship between the state and the local governments to be one of cooperation, where we're supporting and bolstering you. Of course, my legislative accomplishments have been much broader than that. I introduced legislation that moved the state to a system of zero-based budgeting. When I was first elected to the state Senate in 2002, when they would put the budget of the state on our desks, a document about this thick, that document only described about 3% of the state spending, the new programs. And once a new program was approved by the General Assembly and signed into law by the governor, it automatically rolled over into each succeeding budget of the state under a single line item called continuation. I introduced the very first term I was elected legislation that moved us away from continuation budgeting to zero-based budgeting, where the entire budget would have to be rejustified, not just and explained, not just the new programs, but programs that have been approved years or even decades earlier. They would have to be explained and rejustified to make sure that they were still needed. I sponsored the constitutional amendment that put a cap on the state income tax, that makes sure that our income tax will go no higher. I would like to see it lowered. We've got the highest income tax in the Southeast United States, but we are the only state in the union, thanks to that constitutional amendment, that gives businesses that are looking to expand here or to come here, a constitutional guarantee that the income tax will go no higher. I sponsored legislation that requires the periodic rejustification of regulation. I sponsored legislation that completely rewrote or modernized for the first time in 30 years the HMO code. About 8 years ago, and I worked closely with the GMA on this, I wrote legislation that updated our telecom laws that recognized that the cable companies and the telephone companies had basically converged into offering the same services. I sponsored legislation that put into law a Corporate Good Samaritan Act that encouraged corporations to provide free assistance in times of declared emergencies. I have spent the 15 years that I have served in the General Assembly working hard on issues that I believe positively impact the citizens that you represent on the local level and that we represent on the state level. And I'm very proud of what I've been able to accomplish in collaboration with you. I appreciate this opportunity to address your organization. I appreciate y'all taking time from your conference to come listen to us, and thank you so very much for your time and attention today.
Thank you so much for those comments. Ms. Prober, we'll go to you with your first question.
Last year, the governor and you and your colleagues of the General Assembly gave dramatic pay increases to the Georgia State Patrol. Do you support state mandated compensation levels for municipal law enforcement personnel?
I do not believe that the Constitution allows us to set compensation for municipalities, for local governments. It's pretty clear that the Constitution says that the compensation level for all local employees, and that would include public safety employees, is a prerogative of the local government. I don't know that that necessarily applies to the sheriffs or the deputy sheriffs, because the sheriff is a state created, is an office created by the state constitution, and so are his introduced or co-sponsored a constitutional amendment in the last session of the General Assembly that would have attempted to deal with the problem of law enforcement compensation, which I do believe needs to be increased, by authorizing the state to provide an earned income tax credit where state dollars would be used to bolster the compensation through the tax system of local law enforcement officials. I think that's the only way that we really on the state level can impact local law enforcement compensation. I do believe that law enforcement is underpaid, and I do recognize that the dramatic increase in the compensation of the state patrol, which I supported, does put competitive pressure on the local governments. But I think that needs to be addressed in a cooperative and constitutionally appropriate way.
Thank you. Ms. Nolan, you have our final question.
Right. A bill has been introduced that would allow localities to decide how best to proceed with their Confederate monuments, many of which have been criticized as enshrining the so-called lost cause sentiment. The proposal would let individual communities choose whether to keep monuments as is or relocate them, as some cities and elsewhere in the country have done. What is your position on this? As Lieutenant Governor, would you encourage an open debate on the issue?
So, I'm certainly for an open debate on any issue, even issues where I have a opposing viewpoint. The Confederate Monument Law was actually enacted in the same legislation that changed the state flag. And the argument then was that the symbolism of the state flag needed to be changed, but the proponents of that particular change said, but it won't impact, this change won't impact any of the, the monuments to the Confederacy or anything else in the heritage of the country. And so that was part of a compromise that was worked out in 2001 when the state flag was changed, and certainly anyone has a right to introduce legislation that would change that compromise, but that's how that law came about in 2001.
Thank you. We'll reset the clock, and now you have 2 minutes to give us your closing remarks.
I will close out with a admission to you that when I was a youngster, I struggled in Sunday school. I had a hard time with some of the central lessons of my faith, the parables in particular. I had a hard time understanding the wisdom of leaving 99 sheep unguarded because one sheep had run away. I had a real problem with the runaway son getting the feast and the dutiful son having to do all the work to prepare it. I had a real problem with turning the other cheek. I could see potentially running away if you weren't going to strike back, but to stand there and allow yourself to being hit over and over again, all of those parables required explanation for me to understand. But there was one parable that I understood immediately without any explanation at all, and it's the parable of the talents. And for those of you who teach Sunday school, remember Sunday school, in the parable of the talents, a wealthy man journey and takes his fortune and divides it into 3 shares and entrusts each share of his fortune into the hands of a different manager, one of whom takes his share of the fortune and buries it in the ground for safekeeping. The second of whom takes his share of the fortune and deposits it in the biblical equivalent of a bank to earn interest. And the third of whom takes his share of the fortune and buys fields and flocks. No one had to explain to me that the guy who had buried the treasure in the ground had missed an opportunity, and that the one who had bought fields and flocks had done right. I view, and I know that many of you do as well, I view my public service through the prism of that parable. The titles that we hold and that we seek, whether it's council member or mayor or representative or senator or lieutenant governor, those titles in and of themselves don't mean anything. They're like treasure buried in the ground. It's what we do with them. And I pledge in the year I've got left as a state senator, and if I get a chance to be a lieutenant governor, that I'll spend each and every day trying to advance the values that we share.
Thank you
so
so
very
much. We appreciate all of our candidates for being here. I think we're going to have Mayor Bleckinger come back up. Thank you so much, everyone.
That was very interesting and very good, and the questions were excellent. Very good. Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking the candidates for being with us today, and also thanking Maya Prabhu and Jill Nolan for their participation, along with Aileen Harris. I also want to thank GMA staff because, you know, when they're putting together one of our events, whether it's Mayor's Day or it's down in Savannah for a convention, it takes an incredible amount of work and coordination. And so this being added on was really for our benefit. And we just really appreciate them. Thank you for the extra work. Like you didn't need any extra work, but thank you for doing it. And so I just want to recognize GMA staff. I'd also like to thank the city officials who took time to attend this session. I urge you to take an active role in this election, whoever your candidate of choice is, and I urge you to stay involved during the 2018 legislative session. I also encourage you to attend the Mayor's Day Legislative Networking Breakfast and Gubernatorial Candidates Forum in the morning. We'll be hearing from 6 of the major candidates. At this time, I would like to ask all of the candidates that came today if they would join me on stage for a quick photo. Please, come on up. Next, we'll have a reception planned right outside in the foyer. I'm sure you saw them setting up as you came in, and I hope you take time to join us. Hold on, before the noise picks up, hold on. We're going to recognize the people that have provided that reception for us. So just hold on 1 minute. The reception is made possible due to the support of some generous sponsors. As I call each sponsor's name, if you are from one of these companies, please stand or raise your hand so that we may recognize you. Enterprise, Moreland Altabelli and Associates, Municipal Electric Authority of Georgia, Noresco, and Schneider Electric. So please join me in giving a big round of applause. That's due to them. We'll see you at the reception and hopefully tomorrow morning. We're adjourned.